In Search of God by Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. Narrated by Simon Hensby. A most evident mystery. What one is most convinced of is his or her own existence. Despite this, in purely scientific terms, everyone is a mystery. For man is not what he physically appears to be, but consists of what he calls I, and the I is not observable. That is why when the philosopher René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, wanted to give proof of his own existence, he did not say, I consist of a body that is observable, therefore I exist. Instead, he had to say, I think, therefore I exist. Man undoubtedly has an observable existence. We all know that man exists, but in fact this man's existence is at the level of I, and the cognizance of I is at the level of perception or comprehension, and not at the level of observation. Exactly the same is true of God. It is as if God is a greater I. God, at the level of His creation, is directly observable, but God at the level of His being is not directly observable by man. We shall have to believe in God on the basis of the same logical principle which Descartes employed to know himself, and on which all men and women believe in their own existence. I can comprehend God, therefore God exists. The truth is that God's being comprehensible is an undeniable proof of His existence. If we deny God, we shall have to deny our own selves. Since we cannot countenance our own denial, we cannot countenance God's denial either. Everyone who believes in his own existence is logically compelled to say, I exist, therefore God exists. Does God exist? Does God exist? My answer to this question is in the affirmative. Based on my study and my experience, I can say with full conviction that God exists. There is no doubt about it. When I say that God exists, I say this in the scientific sense and not in the popular sense. People generally believe that they are in a position to prove or disprove anything. But this is not the scientific position. According to modern science, you cannot prove or disprove anything. You can only arrive at a probability rather than a certainty. If there is sufficient data to show that this or that thing probably exists, then one can make the statement that this or that thing exists. The present question of whether God exists itself raises another question. Studies in anthropology, that is, the science of man, have established that the concept of God is ingrained in human nature. Belief in God runs in our blood. Every man and woman is a born believer. Everyone undergoes this experience at one point of time or the other. Especially in times of helplessness and in crisis, we discover that there is a supreme being. Every man and woman has experienced this natural fact at least once in his or her life. Then why this question? If the concept of God is present in our flesh and blood, why does one question the existence of God? The reason is very simple. People want to know whether there is a rational basis to their inner belief, whether there is some scientific proof in favour of their inner feelings. I must emphasize that there is certainly a scientific basis for the belief in the existence of God. But people generally fail to discover it for the simple reason that they try to apply a criterion which they wrongly believe to be scientific. They want a proof in terms of observation, whereas this is neither the scientific method nor the criterion by which to judge. If you apply the right criterion, you will find that God is a proven fact. Here I recall an incident which took place in 1965, when I was living in Lucknow. I happened to meet a gentleman who was a doctor of philosophy and a great admirer of Bertrand Russell. Of course, he was an atheist. During our conversation about God, he asked, "What criterion do you have to prove the existence of God?" I replied, "The same criterion which you have for proving the existence of anything else." The dialogue ended there. There was no question and no answer after this. Why did this learned man fall silent? The reason is very simple and well known. My answer was to him a kind of reminder. I reminded him of the fact that we are living in a world where inferential argument is as applicable to the concept of God as to any other concept. In our modern times, scientific knowledge has increased to an unbelievable extent, but according to the Encyclopedia of Ignorance, increase in knowledge has only increased our ignorance. One scientist has rightly said, "We know more and more about less and less." Now it is an established fact that science gives us but a partial knowledge of reality. Human knowledge has two different phases, the pre-Einstein period and the post-Einstein period. In the pre-Einstein period, knowledge was confined to the macro or material world, which was observable and measurable. So it was generally held that everything which has a real existence should also be observable. Anything which could not be observed had no real existence. This meant that only the seen world was real, and what was unseen was unreal, or some kind of fiction. This concept created the theory which is generally called logical positivism. It means that the only valid logical argument is one which is demonstrable in material terms. Otherwise it is simply a baseless claim, and not a valid argument. But in the post-Einstein period, in the early years of the 20th century, when the atom was split, the whole situation changed. After the splitting of the atom, matter as a solid substance disappeared. It was replaced by the micro world, beyond the atomic world, where everything was reduced to unseen waves, neither measurable nor observable. After this revolution in knowledge, logical or rational argument also changed drastically. This changing situation compelled the philosophers and the scientists to revise logical criteria. It has now become an accepted fact that inferential argument is as valid as direct argument. In the post-Einstein era, it was discovered that even so-called observable matter was unobservable. Now everything was waves, and waves were not observable. Present-day science includes so many things like electrons, the law of gravity, X-rays, etc., all of which are non-material in nature. They cannot be observed, but every scientist believes in their existence, for the simple reason that, although we cannot see these things directly, we can see their effect. For example, a falling apple in the case of gravity, and a photograph in the case of X-rays. We believe in the existence of all these things, not by observation, but by their result. In other words, by way of indirect knowledge. This change in human knowledge also changed the theory of logic. Now it is well established in science that inferential argument is as valid as direct argument. For details, see Human Knowledge by Bertrand Russell. In the pre-Einstein era, unbelievers held that the concept of God pertains to the unseen world. And since no direct argument was available to bear this out, belief in God was held to be illogical, and all the relevant indirect arguments were considered scientifically invalid, since they were inferential in nature. But now the whole situation has changed. Nothing is observable, so the existence of anything can be established only by means of inferential argument, rather than by direct argument. If inferential argument is valid with regard to the unseen micro-world, it is also valid with regard to the existence of God. Bertrand Russell, in his book, Why I Am Not a Christian, has admitted this fact. He says that the argument centering on design, propounded by theologians to prove the existence of God, is scientifically valid. Since ancient days, theologians have argued that when there is a design, there must also be a designer. As we see that our world is well designed, it compels us to believe that there is a designer. When we reflect deeply about our world, we find that all over the universe there are clear signs of planning, design, and intelligent control. These signs lead us to believe that there is a creator of creatures, there is a designer of designs, and there is a mover of all movements. No other explanation presents itself. Here I would like to refer to some of these universal signs. The beginning of the universe. Let us begin from the beginning. Science tells us that 25 billion years ago there was a Big Bang in space. After this Big Bang, our universe came into existence. Scientists have found evidence to believe that in the beginning there was what they call a cosmic ball. All the particles now present in the universe were tightly bound to each other in this cosmic ball, in a highly compressed state. According to the known physical laws, only an inner journey was possible for these particles. Physically, there was no possibility of their outward journey in space. Then, according to astronomical studies, this cosmic ball suddenly exploded. The compact particles scattered outward, and the present universe came into existence, perhaps within the space of a few minutes. It was a violent explosion, and we know that every explosion is destructive except one, which is pre-planned. Chernigov of Russia is a recent example. It was a sudden explosion, which proved totally destructive. On the other hand, there is the example of exploding rocks to build tunnels. This second type of explosion is always pre-planned, and as such is always constructive in its result. The Big Bang explosion resulted in a universe that is highly constructive and meaningful in every sense of these words. This miraculous phenomenon is enough to make us believe that the Big Bang explosion was certainly pre-planned. And when it is proved that it was pre-planned, it is automatically proved that behind this pre-planning there was a planner, indeed a super-planner, and it is this super-planner who is God Almighty. Expansion. Scientific studies in space have proved that our universe is an expanding one. We know that in the human world every expansion has its limits. When you blow up a balloon, you cannot blow indefinitely. Every balloon has a blowing limit, and after reaching that limit, it bursts. In human history, there have been so many political empires: the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Mughal Empire, the British Empire, etc. Their rulers wanted to expand their realms indefinitely, but after reaching a certain limit, they became unmanageable, and over time they disintegrated. The same is true of industrial houses or industrial companies. The masters of these industrial empires always want to go on and on expanding. But every day we hear the news that this or that industrial company is facing bankruptcy. Why? It is for the simple reason that after some time they reached an unmanageable limit and collapsed. Contrary to this, the universe presents an exceptionally different example. Although the universe is constantly expanding at an astonishing speed, it is still functioning smoothly after billions and billions of years of expansion. It has never become unmanageable to the point of collapsing. This exceptionally unique phenomenon of the universe is a sufficient proof that there is a super-manager or super-planner behind this world. Otherwise it would have collapsed long ago. For more details, see Evidence of God in an Expanding Universe, compiled by John Clover Mansoma. Harmony. Studies show that there is complete harmony in the universe. There are innumerable stars and planets in space, perhaps more than all the grains of sand on the coasts of all the oceans. All these bodies are continuously moving at an unbelievably rapid speed, but there is no collision between these astral bodies. There are numerous such phenomena in the universe. The rains, for example, are the result of very complex action between the ocean and the sun. A harmonious and universal process makes rainfall possible. The exchange between man and the tree also serves as an example of such harmony. Man inhales oxygen and exhales carbon dioxide. Contrary to this, the tree inhales carbon dioxide and exhales oxygen. This exchange is an extremely complex harmonious process that ensures the life of both man and the tree. Such miraculous phenomena speak without any doubt of there being a central management behind the universe. There is, indeed, a super-manager, and this super-manager is none other than God Almighty. The right proportion. Studies also show that everything in the universe is in the right proportion. The universe is a unique industry. All the products of the universe are produced at the standard of zero defect. Look at the tree. Its present shape is the final model. Any other model of a tree would be unthinkable. Let us look at a man or a woman. Both are final models. No artist could produce any better model for a man or a woman. There are countless things in our world created by God, but everything in nature is so perfectly created that everything is a final model. But if you look at motor cars manufactured by humans, you will find that very many improvements have been made from the time the first motor car was assembled, and this process of development is still continuing. Studies also show that everything in nature is in perfect order. Take, for example, the distance between the Sun and the Earth. The distance between the Sun and the Earth is 93 million miles. Compare this with alternatives, and you will find that this distance is perfectly according to our needs. Had this distance been double the present distance, i.e. 180 million miles, then the Earth would have become so cold that everything would be frozen. No life on Earth would have been possible. And if this distance were half of the present distance, i.e. 50 million miles, the temperature on the surface of the Earth would be so hot that everything would be burnt, and again life on Earth would be rendered impossible. Now let us take the size of the Earth. Had the size of the Earth been double the present size, the gravitational pull would have increased to such an extent that it would have badly affected the growth of human beings. Every man and woman would have been reduced to dwarf-like sizes. If the Earth were half of the present size, the gravitational pull of the Earth would have decreased dangerously. Then every man and woman would have experienced an unchecked physical growth. Everyone would be as tall as the Qutb Minar. What a terrible world it would be! But in the world of nature, everything is perfect from the outset. There is no need for reform or improvement. Everything is a perfect and final model. No change is required in anything. This wonderful perfection is a clear proof that there is a perfect Creator behind creation. Otherwise, perfection of such a kind in this world could never have been possible. Checks and balances. Studies show that in nature a system of checks and balances is prevalent everywhere. Without this system, our world would have become uninhabitable. One such example is found in the world of insects. Biological studies tell us that every insect has the potential of unlimited growth. For example, every grasshopper has the potential to grow bigger and bigger until it becomes as big as a camel or an elephant. This is true of every other insect. According to this, our world should have been filled with insects as large as elephants and camels. Had it been so, there would have been no possibility of mankind living in such a jungle of huge animals and creating a civilization. How was mankind saved from this horrible fate? It was due to a simple mechanism in nature. The fact is that although the body of an insect has the ability for unlimited growth, its breathing tube does not have any scope for growth. This double system in the body of insects serves as a check against its unlimited growth. The growing body of the insect narrows its breathing tube, and this double mechanism in its body serves as a killer for the insects. There are so many other examples of such checks, and it is these checks that maintain the balance in our world. If this were not so, our earth would have become uninhabitable for mankind. See Man Does Not Stand Alone by Cressy Morrison. The planet Earth is a unique exception in the universe because of its rare qualities and attributes. All the numerous celestial bodies in the universe are either huge fiery stars or rocky planets, with the sole exception of the Earth, which has life and its accompanying support elements. This exception itself is a proof of God's existence. Every exception necessarily requires an answer to the question, who or what is the cause of this exception? Without believing in cause and effect, you cannot explain why there is an exception. And this unique exception, in the case of the Earth, is proof enough that God exists. In conclusion, I would like to say that in such a situation, the choice we have is not between the universe with God and the universe without God. This is not an option. The real option is between the universe with God or no universe at all. As we cannot opt for the proposition, the universe without God, we are compelled to opt for the proposition, the universe with God. Man does not stand alone. Julian Huxley, 1887 to 1975, the well-known British writer, did not believe in God. He believed that man did not need God, a concept explained in his aptly titled book, Man Stands Alone. It is noteworthy that reputed American scientist Cressy Morrison countered Huxley's thesis with a book titled Man Does Not Stand Alone. Even more so today, many people express the view that they do not need God, that success can be theirs without their believing in the Almighty. But if you conduct a survey, you will find that their views do not reflect mature perception. In fact, such remarks are spawned by immature minds, mostly belonging to the under 40 age group. Psychological and biological studies show that human beings attain maturity only after reaching middle age. Prior to this, they are not in a position to form any sound opinions on the realities of life. Surveys show, indeed, that superficial remarks about God are made mostly by those who are as yet immature. But with the transition from immaturity to maturity, which comes with the acquisition of experience and knowledge, a great number of people, including atheists and apostates, become serious in their approach to the subject of God. A thinker has aptly said, "A smattering of knowledge turns people away from God. Greater knowledge brings them back to Him." Here are a few examples to illustrate this point. Let us take the case of a youth who, having grown up with romantic ideas, enthusiastically enters upon married life by opting for a love marriage. But very soon this love turns to hate, and the couple ultimately separate. Then the husband realizes that his acceptance of love as the summum bonum was the result of his own immaturity. Consciously or unconsciously, he begins to feel that his perception has not been clear enough to understand life in depth, and that a superior guide is required to compensate for his inexperience. Then there is the example of an ambitious businessman who starts a business. His business goes on expanding until a time comes when it becomes unmanageable. Now he realizes that certain personal limitations bar his way to fulfilling his desires and ambitions. He comes to feel that he needs a vaster world in order to realize his dreams. Similarly, yet another youth forms a political party in order to fulfill his ambitions, and a time comes when he finally contrives to secure an important political niche for himself. But then he meets the fate of Jawaharlal Nehru. Like Nehru, after he was elevated to the position of Prime Minister, he suffers from second thoughts. He feels that there exists a far greater power than himself, and that, without the cooperation of this power, he cannot carry his plans into effect. Most young people enter life with great ambitions, but again and again they undergo such experiences as remind them of their helplessness. Disease, accidents, losses, disadvantages, all these repeatedly remind them that their lot in life is one of unfulfilled desires. Then they see that, however great one's material success, one inevitably dies within the span of 100 years, leaving all one's wealth behind. Such bitter reflection shows that all the sweet dreams of childhood and youth stemmed from ignorance. For it is impossible to have complete fulfillment in this present imperfect world. One's goal in life, whether it be the making of money, the acquisition of fame or power, or anything else of this nature, proves less than ideal. After the individual manages to achieve these things, he again suffers from the feeling that whatever he has achieved falls far below his expectations. Thus he remains as unsatisfied as ever. Finding success becomes as meaningless as not finding it. God, a source of conviction. If you have a super telescope that can view the entire universe, you will first of all see that rare planet called Earth. You will observe that, amidst the totally lifeless universe, this tiny planet has an abundance of life, and all kinds of life-supporting elements. This rare exceptional sight is so overwhelming that you will be wonderstruck. You will also see that the Earth, along with its moon and the other planets, is continuously in motion, i.e., it rotates on its axis and orbits around the Sun. Then this entire solar system revolves in the wider circle of the galaxy, and this galaxy rotates in the much wider circle of the other galaxies. The movement of the stars and planets in this vast endless space will appear astonishingly strange to your sight. You will then see an unbelievable number of vast balls of fire, called stars, which rotate with great speed. Amidst all these astral bodies, our Earth appears hardly bigger than a grain of sand, and this sight will be so strange to you that your own existence will appear to be totally insignificant and valueless. This experience will lead you to the discovery of two things at the same time. Firstly, there is a powerful God in this universe, who is its creator as well as its sustainer. If you can recall this sight of the universe to your mind, your heart will automatically call out that the universe itself is a clear proof of its creator. Secondly, you will feel that you are a helpless and insignificant creature in this universe, and that without God your very existence is not possible. This is the most important reality of life. When one comprehends this reality, one will voluntarily turn towards God. With one's whole being, one will call out, "O God, help me, for without your help, everything will go wrong." In this vast universe, man's only source of support is God. It is by God's guidance that man's ship is brought safely to the shore. Belief in God is the most important thing for man. Man is nothing without this belief. Sometimes in the course of daily life, a feeling of helplessness comes over man, the same kind of helplessness that he experiences after the observation of the universe through a telescope. All men and women have the feeling that they suffer from limitations, when they cannot achieve what they want. These limitations make them feel helpless. Each one of us has experienced either a loss, illness, accident, death, or old age. These experiences repeatedly remind us of the fact that we are in need of a superior power. Without the help of such a superior power, we cannot go on in life. These feelings amount to a psychological proof of the existence of God. We go through this psychological experience at some point of time in our lives. Each one of us, in his inner feelings, witnesses the existence of God. The nature of every human being constantly urges him or her to recognize the need for God. Without God, our lives cannot be complete. Without the help of God, we cannot succeed in life. Man's position is further illustrated by the following example. 100 years ago, a ship sailed from the coast of America to Africa. When the ship was far out to the deep sea, a severe storm broke out. The ship began to shake and jolt. All the passengers were in a state of great fear and anxiety. At this time of crisis, one of the passengers saw a little girl sitting in a corner of the deck. She was playing with her dolls, quite undisturbed by the storm. On seeing this, he became curious and asked her, "Do you know what is happening to our ship?" She asked, "What is the matter?" The passenger told her that the ship was caught in a dangerous storm. The girl calmly replied, "You know, my father is the captain of this ship. He is not going to let it sink." The girl's faith in her father saved her from being a victim of fear at this crucial moment. The same is true of a religious person. He has the same childlike faith in his Creator, God Almighty, but his is a faith of far greater intensity. When catastrophe threatens, he can say with much stronger conviction that God Almighty is the captain of the ship of his life. He will never let it sink at any time or in any situation. In short, spirituality awakens the mind. Spirituality is a great strength at all times. Spirituality is the best formula for character building. Spirituality is a promoter of all good and a killer of all evils. Spirituality is the essence of all religions. Let's all adopt this universal religion. God-oriented life. The Earth is the Sun's satellite. It constantly orbits around the Sun. It takes 1 year to complete such a rotation. This movement of the Earth around the Sun is essential for the healthy functioning of life on Earth. If the Earth did not revolve around the Sun, its existence would have no meaning and life would come to an end. This is a practical example of how we should lead our lives in this world. This example is indeed a physical demonstration that shows how man must revolve around God, just as the earth revolves around the sun. It means that all of man's activities should be based on God. The earth rotates as compelled to by the laws of nature, but man, of his own free will, should surrender to God. He should build a life which is based on the concept of God. This consciousness is the real ascension of man. In this consciousness lies the secret of all success. The God-oriented life begins with the discovery of God. When individuals, whether men or women, discover God, it means that they have found the truth, and this truth pervades their whole being. This feeling of having discovered the truth becomes such a thrilling experience that it fills them with everlasting conviction. This everlasting conviction removes all frustrations from their lives. Therefore, losses are no longer such, for, in spite of them, they never lose the feeling that their greatest asset, i.e. God, is still with them. Man experiences this realization by pondering upon God's creations. The truth is that the present universe is an expression of God's attributes. In this respect, the present universe is a complete introduction to God. God is visible in His creations, just as a human being sees his own reflection in the mirror, without having any doubts about it. The vastness of space tells man that God, its creator, is boundless. The observation of the sun and the stars shows us that God is all light. The heights of the mountains show us the greatness of God. The waves of the sea and the flow of the river tell us that God is a storehouse of boundless blessings. We see God's bounties in the greenery of the trees. Man's existence becomes a proof of God's existence. In the waft of air he experiences a divine touch. In the chirping of the birds he hears God's songs. The God-oriented life for man starts by his remembering God. He begins to feel the presence of God. Everything serves to remind him of God. God's remembrance is never absent from his heart and mind. His mornings and evenings should be spent as if he is living in God's neighbourhood. Just as rain replenishes the crops, so does he remain ever immersed in the remembrance of God. God is a spiritual focus for man. One whose heart is attached to God undergoes spiritual experiences at every moment. Belief in God becomes a source of spiritual development for him. Filled with the love of God, he does not need anything further. God becomes a vast ocean for him to continue to swim in without ever experiencing any limit. In the form of spiritual awakening, he receives such great wealth that he does not feel any need for anything else. For one who discovers God, the entire universe becomes an open book of God for him. Every leaf of a tree becomes a page of the divine book. When he sees the sun, he feels as if God is lighting his heavenly torch so that he may read his book clearly. The universe becomes, as it were, a supernal university, and he its student. Finding God is to find his centre of love. Man by birth is a seeker of a supreme being who is far above him, who is free from all limitations, and who may form the centre of his feelings. In short, a being after finding whom the grown man becomes as satisfied as a child after being held in the embrace of his mother. This discovery of God saves one from regarding something other than God as God, and mistakenly and unrealistically thinking it to be the answer to the urge inherent in his nature. The discovery of God is to fulfill his or her real urge to find God, and the failure to discover God means failing to find that which is man's greatest need. One who fails to find God is compelled by his natural urge to give the place of God to something other than God. This place is sometimes accorded to a certain human being, sometimes to a certain animal, sometimes to a phenomenon of nature, sometimes to a certain material power, sometimes to a certain supposed concept, and sometimes just to the self. Even if one fails to discover God, or he becomes a denier of God, it is not in his or her power to stifle the urge in his nature to find God. That is why those men and women who have not found God inevitably come to hold something other than God as God, and this supposed God is always some creature or the other of God. By nature it is possible for man not to accept the real God as God, but it is not possible for anyone to save himself or herself from granting the status of divinity to something other than God. Making God one's object of worship raises man's position. On the contrary, regarding something other than God as God amounts to descending from the level of humanity. Submission to God is the only way of life for both man and the universe. The concept of accountability. God is indispensable to man. His life is incomplete without God. A philosopher has aptly remarked that had there been no God, we would have had to invent one. Fortunately, God exists in reality. We can believe in God with conviction, not as a supposition, but as a fact. And we can accord Him the place He deserves in our lives. It is essential that man should have within his reach a super formula for life's management. God provides just such a formula, a complete principle for life's management. Human beings are not like machines controlled by a mechanical system, nor are they like animals who are governed by their instincts. Human beings enjoy freedom. They take decisions about their actions of their own free will. Now the question arises as to how to keep man to the right course, how to make him consistently disciplined in his behaviour. History shows the ineffectiveness of all worldly measures in this connection, whether social pressures, enforcement of the law of the land, or the appeals of reformers. Experience shows that the pressure of society is limited, if not totally ineffective. There are so many loopholes in the law that it is not difficult for wrongdoers to find a way out. The reformers' bid to reform people are nothing but appeals, and appeals alone cannot bring about a revolution in human life. The truth is that for the attainment of disciplined behaviour, it is essential for one to be convinced of the existence of a power far superior to himself, a being who is aware of man's activities at every moment, who can reward and punish man, and from whom it is impossible to escape. There can only be one being of this nature, and that is God. Belief in God functions at two levels at the same time. On the one hand, man finds in God a guardian who is aware of all his activities, and who has unlimited power to chastise him. It is not possible for man to escape God's chastisement. Belief in God compels man to steadfastly adopt a proper attitude in all situations, privately as well as publicly. Only then can he save himself from the wrath of God. Another point is that belief in God is a storehouse of limitless hope. Man can lead his life in this world with the conviction that if he incurs any loss because of treading the path of truth, or if he suffers from any other adversity, he will be able manfully to endure it. For if he adheres to the path of truth, God will grant him a reward in the form of eternal paradise, and there can be no reward greater than this. It is not possible for man on his own to bind himself to moral values or adhere to justice. This is possible only when he is convinced of the fact that he is under a superpower who observes justice to the extent of perfection, for whom it is fully possible to guide man to the true path and also punish those who deviate from this true path. This present limited world is totally inadequate for punishing a criminal. Similarly, this world is also inadequate for granting great rewards for one's good deeds. The concept of God tells us that God can create a far better world free from all the limitations of the present world, where reward and punishment both can be satisfactorily awarded. The concept of a living and powerful God is necessarily accompanied by the concept of accountability, and the concept of accountability guarantees right thinking and right actions on the part of man. It makes man cautious by reminding him of God's chastisement. Moreover, this gives him the conviction of receiving God's reward if he adheres to the right path at all costs and in all situations. The concept of God provides man with an ideology in which loss is turned to gain, and in which adversity brings with it good tidings.